The first thing that truly shattered the quiet hum of the lounge was the laughter. It was loud, braying, and drenched in the kind of arrogance money can buy but can't make classy. He jabbed a manicured finger toward the gleaming helicopter on the tarmac, his voice booming for everyone to hear. "I'll tell you what," he announced to the room, but his dismissive eyes were locked on her. "You find me a pilot who can handle a beast like that right now, and I'll be impressed. Hell, fly the heli and I'll make him my heir." His friends roared along with him, a perfect sycophant chorus. The man, Richard Sterling, smirked, looking at the unassuming black woman in the corner as if she were just part of the furniture, placed there for his amusement. Section 1, The Setup, an unassuming presence. The private airfield lounge at Westhaven was a temple to quiet wealth. The air smelled of Italian leather, fresh coffee, and the faint, thrilling tang of jet fuel. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, glinting off chrome furniture and crystal glasses held in privileged hands. This was a place where life-changing deals were sealed with a quiet nod, a place where real power never needed to shout. Richard Sterling, however, never got that memo. He was new money, and it fit him like a suit 2 sizes too small, gaudy, tight, and trying way too hard. He held court in the center of the lounge, broadcasting his own success. He talked about his acquisitions, his yacht in Monaco, the politicians in his pocket. His buddies, 2 younger guys who copied his expensive taste but lacked his net worth, hung on his every word, their laughter a constant, fawning echo. In a quiet corner, far from the vortex of Richard's ego, sat Amara Vance. She was the polar opposite of the scene he was making. Dressed in a simple but perfectly tailored navy blue pantsuit, she was an island of calm in his sea of noise. Her presence was so understated, you wouldn't notice her unless you were in her lap, but her eyes were fixed on the tarmac, where the subject of Richard's boast sat gleaming in the afternoon sun, a brand new Augusta Westland AW-169, its paint the color of a midnight sky. Her helicopter. Just an hour ago, she'd finalized the acquisition of a smaller airline, folding it into her own booming empire, Vance Aviation. This helicopter was the new crown jewel of that fleet, a state-of-the-art machine she had personally selected. She wasn't here to celebrate, but to observe. To feel the weight of her new responsibility, to see the machine that represented another milestone on a very long road. Her mind drifted. It always did in these quiet moments of victory. She remembered the cramped apartment she shared with her grandmother, smelling of old books and boiled cabbage. She remembered fighting for scholarships, pulling all-nighters fueled by cheap coffee and a desperate need to prove herself. She remembered her first logistics job, where she was passed over for promotions for men who were less qualified but had the right last name. And she remembered Sal, the old, grizzled flight engineer who saw the fire in her eyes. He was the one who taught her about engines, thrust, and lift, the beautiful, brutal physics of flight. He didn't see her as a woman or a person of color in a white, male industry, he just saw a mind hungry for knowledge. "You don't just have a head for business, kid," he'd grumbled, wiping grease from his hands. "You have a feel for the machine. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you don't belong in the sky." Sal was gone now, but his words were etched into her soul. Vance Aviation wasn't handed to her. She had built it from sheer force of will, calculated risks, and an encyclopedic knowledge of an industry that tried to keep her out. This new helicopter wasn't just an asset, it was a symbol. It was proof she belonged. A sudden burst of laughter from Richard's corner snapped her back to reality. He was looking right at her now, a lazy, condescending smirk on his lips. She had just become the new target of his performance. Section 2, The Spark of Conflict. Richard's gaze swept over Amara, cataloging her simple suit, her quiet demeanor, her race, and filing her into a mental box labeled irrelevant. In his world, women were either trophies or staff. Amara was neither, and that clearly irritated him. He leaned toward his friends, his voice a stage whisper designed to carry. "See that?" he gestured with his chin. "Probably waiting for her boss. Hope he's paying her well enough to afford the coffee in here." His friends snickered on cue. Amara heard every word. She didn't even flinch. She'd heard it all before. It was the background noise of her life, the constant static of underestimation. She just took a slow, deliberate sip of her water, her eyes still on the helicopter. Her helicopter. Richard, emboldened, turned his attention back to the machine. Now that, he said, puffing out his chest, is a serious piece of equipment. The new AW169. Twin engine, top of the line. Costs upwards of $9 million, before you even customize it. He said it like he was reading from a brochure, but also taking personal credit for its existence. Takes a real pilot to handle that. Not just any weekend warrior. He looked back at Amara, a glint of cruel fun in his eyes. He decided to drag her into his little show, a prop to make himself look even bigger. This is when his arrogance crested into a wave of pure condescension. "I'll tell you what," he announced, his voice booming across the lounge. His gesture was grand, theatrical, aimed at the helicopter and, somehow, at Amara herself. "You find me a pilot who can handle a beast like that right now, and I'll be impressed." He paused, letting the weight of his supposed authority settle. Then he delivered the punchline, his gaze locking directly onto Amara. "Hell, fly the heli and I'll make him my heir." The laughter that followed was explosive. His friends howled. Richard let out that braying laugh that echoed off the polished floors. The joke was aimed at some imaginary pilot, but the real target was Amara. The message was clear: a woman like her wouldn't know the first thing about a machine like that, other than to fetch the man who could fly it. Section 3, Rising Action. The walk of a queen. The laughter died, leaving a tense, expectant silence. Richard and his crew watched Amara, smirks plastered on their faces, waiting for her to flush with embarrassment, stammer, or just hurry away. They expected her to shrink. They were about to be very disappointed. Amara didn't shrink. She sat perfectly still for a moment, letting their condescension hang in the air and curdle. Her mind wasn't racing, it was focusing. This moment felt like the sum of 1,000 tiny cuts. The guidance counselor who suggested a more realistic career. The loan officer who asked to speak to her husband. The boardrooms where her ideas were ignored, only to be applauded when a man repeated them minutes later. Each of those moments had been a stone. Some she'd stumbled over. Others, she'd picked up and used to build the fortress of her resolve. Richard Sterling wasn't special. He was just the loudest, most cartoonish version of an obstacle she'd been dismantling for years. A cold, hard clarity settled over her. This wasn't about anger. It was about honoring Sal. It was about honoring the girl who studied by candlelight. It was about honoring the woman who refused to be erased. Slowly, with a grace that seemed to make time itself slow down, Amara placed her tablet on the empty seat beside her. She smoothed a non-existent crease in her trousers. Then, she stood up. Her movement was so fluid, so deliberate, it was the perfect answer to Richard's noise. The room seemed to let out a collective gasp. Every eye was on her. Richard's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He expected a retreat, but she wasn't retreating. She was advancing. She took a step. Then another. Her posture was perfect, her shoulders back, chin high. She wasn't stomping in anger or scurrying in shame. She was gliding. It was the walk of a woman who owned the very ground beneath her feet. She walked directly toward the massive glass doors leading to the tarmac. "Where's she going?" one of Richard's friends whispered, his laughter now a nervous memory. Richard didn't answer. His smug confidence was gone, replaced by a bewilderment that was quickly souring into dread. This wasn't in the script. The prop was moving on its own. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. For the first time all day, Richard Sterling wasn't in control of the room. Amara Vance was. Amara pushed through the glass doors and stepped onto the sun-drenched tarmac. The wind immediately whipped a few strands of hair across her face, but she didn't seem to notice. She walked toward the AW-169, her heels making a steady, rhythmic click on the concrete. Beside it, a young pilot in a crisp Vance Aviation uniform was finishing his walk-around. He looked up as she approached, his professional calm instantly sharpening with deep, genuine respect. Inside, Richard and his friends were pressed against the glass, their faces a mask of confusion and dawning horror. Amara stopped in front of the young pilot. "Is she ready for me, Ben?" she asked, her voice calm and clear. Ben straightened up, holding out a clipboard. "Yes, Ms. Vance," he replied, his tone precise and deferential. "Pre-flight checks are complete. The custom avionics suite you ordered is fully integrated. She's all yours. You're going to love how she handles." The name hit the lounge like a physical blow. Ms. Vance. One of Richard's friends, a man who prided himself on knowing all the players, went white. "Vance?" he choked out. "As in? Amara Vance? The CEO of Vance Aviation?" Richard just stared, his mouth hanging open. Vance Aviation. The company that had just devoured his competitor. The name that had been all over the financial news. He had pictured some grizzled old man, someone like him. Not her. Amara took the clipboard, her eyes scanning the checklist with an expert speed. She gave a slight nod and handed it back. "Thank you, Ben. I'll take it from here." Without a single glance back at the gawking faces in the window, she reached for the cockpit door and, in one smooth, practiced motion, swung herself into the pilot's seat. The cockpit was a beautiful, complex tapestry of screens and controls. To Amara, it was home. She slipped on the headset, and the world went quiet. With a series of fluid movements that spoke of countless hours in the air, her hands danced across the console, initiating the startup sequence. A low whine escalated into the unmistakable roar of two Pratt & Whitney turbines spooling to life. The massive rotor overhead began to turn, faster and faster, until it was a shimmering, transparent disk. The sound was immense, a physical force that vibrated through the ground and rattled the very glass where Richard Sterling stood, utterly defeated. With a final check, Amara gently increased the collective. The roar deepened, and the helicopter lifted off the ground, light as a dragonfly. She brought it to a perfect, stable hover 10 feet in the air, the machine responding to her slightest touch as if it were part of her own body. The downdraft from the rotors was a miniature tempest. It blasted across the tarmac, kicking up a furious whirlwind of dust and grit. This swirling cloud slammed against the lounge windows, turning Richard's front row seat into a blurry, chaotic mess. It was the physical manifestation of the storm she had just unleashed on his ego. Through the chaos, Richard could just make out the helicopter's silhouette. For a split second, he could have sworn Amara turned her head and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in his direction. It wasn't a taunt. It was a dismissal. Then, with a grace that defied the machine's raw power, she banked the helicopter smoothly, dipped the nose, and surged into the sky. She disappeared over the horizon, leaving behind only the fading chop of the rotors and a profound, ringing silence. The dust settled. Inside the lounge, no one moved. Richard's friends were suddenly fascinated by the patterns on the carpet. Richard Sterling stood frozen, a pale ghost in the reflection on the glass. The man who measured his worth in decibels and dollars had just been silenced by a quiet woman he'd refused to even see. He'd offered to make a pilot his heir, a joke built on the fantasy that he was a king. He just learned a brutal lesson: a true inheritance isn't given. It's built, bolt by bolt, against all odds. Amara Vance hadn't just flown a helicopter. She had flown her entire empire right in his face and left him grounded in the dust of his own arrogance. CTA and conclusion: strength doesn't always have to be the loudest thing in the room. Sometimes, it's the quiet confidence to get in the pilot's seat and fly. What's a moment where you were completely underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong? Share your story in the comments below. For more stories that inspire and empower, don't forget to subscribe. Because true power isn't about the noise you make, it's about the heights you're willing to climb.